Hi, I am Coach Coleman here at Better You Solutions, and I have a lovely guest with us today. Would you mind sharing your name and what it is you have to offer or want to speak about?
I'm Rebecca Eggers, and I help people achieve freedom. I know that maybe sounds a little bit like a cliche, but what I mean by that is really the freedom internally that comes from being able to live a creative life, being able to live a life of wholeness. So it's not sort of like, how do I fly off into the into the sunset and live my perfect dream life or whatever. It's deeper than that for me. It's activating the freedom that allows us to make better choices, that allows us to live fuller lives, right where we are, or by riding off into the sunset. So,
I
and
like, oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and you asked what I have to offer. And I have 12 years of experience doing this work. I have a lot of information and understanding about trauma. I do soul reconciliation sometimes with my clients who need to make inner peace, achieve peace within themselves. And I sometimes do that, on an ancestral basis or in the family line. So I have a lot of experience with achieving that inner freedom through deeper work.
That's great. That's great. Because I know nowadays a lot of people look for that direction, sense of direction, or to how to do the inner work and what does that look like, and they need guidance along the way. Um, have what For our audience who are listening, what would be some gems or some pointers that you would like to give them when doing that inner work?
Well, I would say if you're dealing with trauma that's got you stuck, because that's really what trauma does. It causes you to move in a cycle or a circle that appears to have actual progress because you get these moments of respite. So it's kind of like an internalized cycle of violence and often an external cycle of violence that just keeps repeating itself. So if you're talking about, making inner peace and achieving freedom from those kinds of cycles, then you're really talking about very deep trauma that is something you can't easily give voice to. And I would advise people that they seek modalities that are creative in nature or that use imagery and sensation to access the deeper memories more than talk therapy, because typically you can only voice what's been processed enough for you to actually have a logical explanation for it and the ability to put words to it. A lot of trauma that's unprocessed is stored in the right hemisphere of the brain versus the left hemisphere, which has the verbal and logical centers. So I would say if you're struggling with that, you want to find a modality that can use the sensations that you're feeling and the images that tend to pop into your mind, the memories that you have, without necessarily requiring you to vocalize a story.
And I love the fact that you were able to break that down and use the neuroscience part of it by explaining the left side versus the right side of the brain, because a lot of people don't know that in detail. So that does goes to show that you've done your research, you know the knowledge behind really doing the work of just talking it out. But how does it really affect your body? And how does your body have effects to the inner work as well? So I appreciate that as a social worker and just doing psychology in general. I appreciate you knowing that and including that in your practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a very spiritual approach to working with trauma. I'm ordained as a minister. I work, across all faiths. So we don't have a discussion about religion. Anyone who has a spiritual path of any kind, I work with their spiritual path because that's really important. And the process that I've designed, which is the soul reconciliation process, is something that I built in the field because I became a coach. And then people kept coming to me with trauma that hadn't been resolved in other modalities. And I kind of instinctively started doing certain things. And then later was able to back those things up with research in terms of exactly what I was doing, which is a process of using those memories and sensations to access moments in which, you know, we tend to get, like I said, we tend to get stuck and live through the same thing over and over again. So accessing those moments and using a process that brings a rescue to the part of us that's been stuck and a gentle release. Typically it's a gentle release, it can stir some things up, for the person to actually begin to act creatively in their lives.
And you're right, it is a gentle touch. It's very gentle, and it can bring things up front that someone have probably buried way in the back for a very long time. But that's when it's important to work with coaches like yourself, because you're there to help guide them through that. Because it can be very chaotic for someone who's dealing with everything, all of those emotions, all of those memories and feelings all at once, and they're not used to that, right? So when a coach like yourself or myself comes along to help guide them and your experience, you know, the research behind it, physically, mentally, and spiritually, and like you mentioned, not a particular religion, but any religion that they have, you're open to working with them. You're knowledgeable about it as well. And that's when it's also important to work with professionals like ourselves, because it's not judgmental, it's not biased, and it's confidential for one. And it's just a different feeling than talking to your friends or family.
Yes, I agree. And I think also what you just said brought up an important point for me, which is that a lot of us the world over are not dealing with post-traumatic stress. We're dealing with ongoing traumatic stress that's unfolding all around us. You know, just within the last couple of days, where I live down in Chiapas, Mexico, we've had another explosion of violence in our city. And there's been an increasing violence to the south of here and also to the north. That I don't, you know, I don't need to say too much about that, but you can imagine that I'm kind of sitting in the middle of that. So there's ongoing trauma unfolding around the people who live here and around me, and that has an impact on me. And then we have, you know, two active wars in the world, and we had a shooting in the United States last night. So, you know, a lot of times it's tempting to talk about the trauma that happened in the past and how we're going to deal with the trauma that happened in the past. And it's going to somehow open up a different future, but we can't really have that conversation in that way when the trauma is ever present. And I think it's probably worth exploring, what do you do about the collision of past trauma that you're trying to move through with ongoing trauma in the world, that can happen from a range of causes.
Correct. And there is such thing as re-traumatizing, right? So if you went through a trauma in the past and then you're still going through ongoing traumas, whether it happens directly to you or just around you, it can still be re-traumatizing. It can be a trigger. And I think that's the important part, like you said, of identifying that happening. Because a lot of times we don't realize that we're being re-traumatized. We don't realize the re-traumatizing moment because we don't realize the trigger. And I think that's when professionals come in place, because we can help identify those triggers. And some people don't even know to look for triggers, or what is a trigger, what are their triggers. Um, yeah, and I like that you brought that to my attention as well, because it's a different way of thinking.
Yeah, it requires a whole different approach, because the release that you can get from healing can actually feel like a self-deception when the violence is active in the environment. So what are we actually doing when we're releasing these past traumas, and how does that help us cope with the ongoing traumas that are unfolding in the environment? And I've been giving this a lot of thought. Like, I've had a lot of trauma throughout my life, and I've done a lot of work on that trauma. And yet here I am in this situation where there's unfolding violence around, and what is it that I can do differently? How can my trauma healing The release of my trauma actually helped me to navigate this. And I really came up with, in the last couple of days, an important point on that, which is that unhealed trauma causes us to respond to new traumas in unconscious ways. It causes us maybe to move closer to the danger or the chaos when we should be moving away from it, or it causes us to carry that event longer than we need to carry it. The last couple of days since we've had this most recent explosion of violence here and all the things that are happening around the world, I've really just been working on the process of dropping those sensations and dropping my connection to those sensations and to the events themselves, rather than feeling like I have to process all of the feelings that go with that, taking every opportunity to drop into writing. So writing articles for my work, or some other kind of creativity, like I make products with artwork and I sell them on Redbubble, for instance. So when everything just becomes too much and I can't do anything else to redirect my mind, I can just start doing, the simple steps of turning my art into, the products that I routinely work with, because it's become a little bit like routine for me. So it allows me to kind of shift my mind into that space of moving forward. And that helps me to actually engage less with the sensations that are trying, with the environmental, I should say, the environmental stimuli that would otherwise like to grab hold of my, trauma triggers and my old patterns and pull me further into something that I can't control and could put me actually in more danger, because I might actually be more inclined to just be in the freeze response and be kind of unable to address my life, if that makes sense. So
It
anything
makes perfect sense. Perfect. Because it sounds like what you're explaining in a different way is coping skills, to find out what helps relax you, and not involving anyone else, but what really helps you relax and get back on track, is coping skills, which a lot of people do automatically without thinking, because no one just walks down the road and say, "Hey, I'm going to do a coping skill today." You automatically do it when you feel stressed out or something is happening, kind of like what you're explaining. So it makes perfect sense. And with that being said, what are some what do you have a website or any social media? How can people reach you if they wanted to work with you, speak with you more, or gain more information?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. You can find me with just my name, which is spelled a little funny. So that's kind of how you can find me. You got to get the spelling right. And then it's usually pretty easy to find me, but it's Rebecka, Rebecka, Eggers, Eggers. And my website is really simple. It's thepassionpath.vision.
Perfect, perfect. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and hope to see you soon. And remember, you guys, reach out to her for any additional questions. See if you want to work with her, if she's a good fit, because you never know what you may need until you try.
Thank you.